In a galaxy where strength determines status and beauty commands empires, one human's choice would shatter every rule the alien nobility held sacred. When Marcus Chun, Earth's most decorated fighter, stood before the assembled royalty of 12 worlds after his unprecedented victory in the Galactic Combat Championships, every eye watched as he bypassed the radiant queens and celebrated princesses. Instead, he knelt before the forgotten daughter of the Zephyrian throne, a scarred, overlooked princess who had never expected to be chosen by anyone, let alone the terrifying human who had just defeated the galaxy's greatest warriors. What the assembled nobles didn't understand was that humans don't choose based on what others celebrate. They choose based on what matters. And sometimes what matters most is hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to see beyond the surface. This is the story of how one human's unconventional choice became the catalyst for revolution across the stars. Marcus Chin's fists were still bloody when they brought him before the assembled royalty. The arena's roar echoed in his ears as he stepped into the crystalline chamber where 12 alien royal families waited in their ceremonial finery. The Galactic Combat Championships had never seen anything like what he'd just accomplished. A human from the backwater planet Earth had defeated every champion the galaxy could offer. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien architecture, with walls that shifted through colors representing the emotional states of its occupants. Right now, those walls flickered between the deep purple of amazement and the sharp yellow of uncertainty. The nobles seated on their elevated platforms wore expressions that matched the chaotic light display. "Behold the victor," announced Thexeller, the golden-scaled announcer whose voice carried the weight of 1,000 tournaments. His reptilian features showed no emotion as he gestured toward Marcus with one of his forearms. By ancient law and sacred tradition, the champion may claim any royal daughter as his prize. Choose wisely, human. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, still wearing his battle-scarred armor. Blood from various alien opponents stained the reinforced plates, and his human features, pale skin, brown hair, and those strangely small eyes, marked him as utterly foreign in this gathering of galactic nobility. The assembled crowd whispered in dozens of languages, their voices creating a symphony of disbelief. The royal daughters sat in a semicircle, each representing the finest genetic specimens their species could offer. To Marcus's left, Princess Yalara of the Centauran Empire sat with skin that literally glowed with bioluminescent patterns. Her beauty was legendary across 3 star systems, and her family's wealth could purchase entire solar systems. Every curve of her form had been genetically perfected over generations of selective breeding. Next to her, the twin daughters of the Silicon Lords sat perfectly still, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns that hypnotized most species into submission. Their planet controlled the rare Earth elements that powered faster than light travel, making them perhaps the most politically valuable marriage prospects in the galaxy. The Etherean princess floated above her platform, her gossamer wings creating mesmerizing patterns in the air. Her people had achieved a form of limited immortality, and choosing her would grant the victor centuries of life extension technology. Her laugh was said to drive lesser beings to madness with its beauty. Each princess represented not just individual perfection, but vast interstellar empires, trade networks, and political alliances. The marriage that would result from this choice could reshape the balance of power across known space. Every ambassador and noble in attendance had spent months preparing for this moment, calculating which choice would benefit their own interests. But Marcus's eyes weren't focused on any of these celebrated beauties. His gaze had found something else entirely. In the far corner of the chamber, almost hidden in shadow, sat Princess Kira of Zephyros. Where the other princesses radiated power and perfection, Kira seemed to shrink into herself. Her pale blue skin was marred by old scars, a horrific disfigurement for a species that prized flawless beauty above all else. Her left eye was clouded with blindness from some long-ago injury, and her wing-like appendages hung limp and useless at her sides. The other royals had positioned her seat deliberately in the shadows, as far from the center of attention as protocol would allow. She wore simple robes instead of the elaborate finery displayed by her counterparts. No genetic enhancement had touched her features. No wealth or power backed her claim to royal blood. She was, by every measure that mattered to galactic society, worthless. Kira kept her good eye focused on the floor, clearly expecting to be ignored as she had been her entire life. Her homeworld of Zephyros had fallen into economic collapse decades ago, making her political value essentially zero. Even her own family rarely acknowledged her existence, treating her as an embarrassment to their ancient bloodline. The choice must be made, Thexaler said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the assembled crowd. Speak, champion of Earth. Which royal daughter will you claim as your prize? The chamber fell silent. Even the color-shifting walls seemed to hold their breath, displaying a neutral gray as all attention focused on the bloodied human warrior. Cameras from 1,000 worlds broadcast the moment across the galaxy. This choice would be remembered for centuries. Marcus took a step forward, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. Every princess straightened, preparing for potential selection. Princess Yalara's bioluminescent patterns brightened seductively. The Silicon twins synchronized their light refraction for maximum effect. The Etherean princess descended slightly, her wings creating hypnotic spirals. But Marcus walked past them all. His heavy footsteps carried him toward the shadowed corner where Princess Kira sat alone. The gas from the assembled nobles created a sound like breaking glass. Camera feeds across the galaxy flickered as operators struggled to follow this impossible development. Kira looked up in shock as the human champion approached her. Her scarred features showed confusion, then fear. No one ever approached her intentionally. She started to stand, perhaps thinking she was meant to move aside so Marcus could address someone else. Instead, Marcus knelt before her on one knee, his armor clanking against the crystal floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "I choose Princess Kira of Zephyros," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "She will be my wife." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Nobles leaped to their feet in outrage. Ambassadors shouted protests in a dozen languages. The chamber's walls flashed angry red as emotional chaos engulfed the room. This was unprecedented, unthinkable, completely contrary to every expectation and tradition. Princess Yalara's bioluminescence flared with insulted rage. "This is madness," she shrieked. "I am the daughter of an empire that spans 50 worlds. My beauty is celebrated across the galaxy. How dare this primitive creature choose that broken thing over me?" The Silicon twins rose from their platforms, their crystalline bodies ringing like bells in their fury. "Our family controls the means of interstellar travel. Without us, his pathetic species will be trapped in their single-star system forever." But Marcus ignored the chaos around him. His eyes remained fixed on Kira, who stared at him with complete bewilderment. Tears had begun to flow from her good eye, cutting tracks through the faint scars on her cheek. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the shouting nobles. "I am nothing. I have nothing to offer. My world is dying. My people are scattered. I am broken, scarred, forgotten. Why would you choose me?" Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't move, he gently touched her scarred cheek. His human hands were rough from a lifetime of fighting, marked with their own scars and calluses. "Because you're the only one in this room who didn't expect to be chosen," he said simply. "The only one who isn't here because of what you can give me, but because of who you are. And because when I looked at all of you, you were the only one who looked back at me like I was a person instead of a prize to be won." The chamber erupted in fresh outrage at his words. Several ambassadors demanded the choice be overruled. Ancient protocols were cited. Threats of war were made. The walls strobed through every color in the spectrum as emotional chaos consumed the gathering. Thexaler raised all four arms for silence, his scales shifting to a deeper gold that commanded attention. Gradually, the noise died down to angry murmurs. "The choice has been made according to ancient law," he announced. "The champion has spoken. The bonding ceremony will commence in 3 days, as tradition demands." "This is an insult to every civilized species in the galaxy," screamed the Centauran ambassador. "The human has clearly suffered brain damage in his fights. No rational being would make such a choice." Marcus stood slowly, helping Kira to her feet. She moved carefully, favoring her damaged left side. Up close, he could see that her scars weren't just from a single injury. They told a story of a lifetime of neglect and abuse. Someone had hurt her badly, and no one had cared enough to help her heal properly. "My choice stands," Marcus said, turning to address the assembled royalty. "And I suggest you all remember something important." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the angry, confused faces of galactic nobility. "I just defeated every warrior your civilizations could produce. Every champion, every enhanced soldier, every perfect genetic specimen you threw at me. And I did it because humans don't fight for glory or recognition or to prove our superiority." His voice grew harder, carrying the edge that had struck fear into opponents across the galaxy. "We fight for what we believe in. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We fight because it's right, not because it's profitable. And right now, I'm choosing to stand with someone who has been ignored and dismissed her whole life, despite being more worthy of respect than any of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Princess Kira stared up at Marcus with an expression of wonder, as if seeing sunlight for the first time after years in darkness. Finally, she found her voice. "You don't understand what you've done," she said softly. "By choosing me, you've gained nothing. No alliance, no wealth, no political advantage. My family will disown me rather than acknowledge this union. Your species will gain no benefit from this choice." Marcus smiled, the first time his expression had softened since entering the chamber. "Princess," he said gently, "you still don't understand. I didn't choose you for what you could give me. I chose you for who you are. And who you are is someone worth choosing." The assembled nobles began filing out of the chamber, muttering angrily among themselves. Deals that had been prepared for months were suddenly worthless. Political calculations had to be completely redrawn. The human had not simply made an unexpected choice. He had rejected the entire system that governed galactic politics. As the crowd thinned, Kira and Marcus found themselves alone in the center of the vast chamber. She still looked bewildered, as if expecting to wake up from an impossible dream. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked around at the empty platforms where the other princesses had sat, at the color-shifting walls that had finally settled into a calm blue, at the alien architecture that represented a civilization far older and more advanced than his own. "Now," he said, "we have 3 days to get to know each other before we're married. And after that, I think we might be in for quite an adventure." Kira's scarred lips curved into what might have been the first genuine smile of her life. "I think you might be right, Marcus Chon of Earth. I think you might be very right indeed." As they walked out of the chamber together, the human champion and the forgotten princess, neither of them realized they were about to become the catalyst for a revolution that would reshape the galaxy. All they knew was that for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't walking alone. The first part of their story was just beginning, and the consequences of Marcus's choice would ripple across the stars in ways that no one could have imagined. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't make decisions the way other species did. And sometimes the most important choices were the ones that looked foolish to everyone else. The walls of the chamber finally settled into a warm golden glow as the unlikely couple disappeared into the corridors beyond. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the distant roar of crowds still celebrating in the arena, completely unaware that their champion had just changed everything. The gardens of the royal quarter existed in a carefully maintained ecosystem that showcased flora from dozens of worlds. Ancient Tyrillian trees stretched their silver branches toward an artificial sun, while crystalline flowers from the outer rim chimed softly in the filtered breeze. It should have been peaceful, but for Princess Kira, walking through these gardens had always been a reminder of her isolation. Marcus found her there the morning after his choice, sitting alone on a bench carved from single piece of Andromedan stone. She wore the same simple robes as before, and her damaged wing appendages hung loosely at her sides. The contrast between her plainness and the exotic beauty surrounding her was stark. "I was hoping we could talk," Marcus said, approaching slowly. His armor had been replaced with simple clothing provided by the tournament organizers, a plain tunic and trousers that made him look less like a fearsome warrior and more like an ordinary man. Kira looked up, still seeming surprised that anyone would seek her out intentionally. "Of course," she said, moving aside on the bench. "Though I should warn you, Many people have reconsidered their association with me once they learned more about my circumstances. Marcus sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. What circumstances would those be? Where do I begin? Kira's laugh held no humor. My homeworld, Zephyros, was once a center of learning and culture. We were philosophers, artists, scientists, but we refused to militarize when the expansion wars began 3 decades ago. While other worlds built fleets and weapons, we built libraries and observatories. She gestured to her scars with her good hand. When the raiders came, we had nothing to defend ourselves with except poetry and mathematical theorems. They took everything of value and left us with nothing but ruins and debt. My injuries come from that time. I was 10 years old, hiding in the observatory when the raiders found me. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened? They thought it would be amusing to see if a Zephyrian could still fly with broken wings, Kira said matter-of-factly. When they discovered I couldn't, they decided to test how much damage I could survive. They were very thorough in their research. The casualness of her tone made the words even more horrifying. Marcus had seen war, had fought in conflict across human space, but there was something particularly cruel about torturing a child for entertainment. Your family? He asked. Dead or scattered? I survived because a group of traitors found me 3 days later and brought me to relatives in the core worlds. My uncle claimed guardianship, but only because it came with a small stipend from the Galactic Refugee Commission. I became a reminder of my species' weakness, a living symbol of what happens to worlds that choose philosophy over power. Kira turned to look at him directly, her scarred face showing curiosity rather than self-pity. Your turn, Marcus Chun of Earth. What drives a human to fight in alien arenas? What brought you so far from home? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the crystalline flowers sway in the artificial breeze. Earth is complicated. We're a young species by galactic standards, barely 300 years since we achieved faster-than-light travel. Most of the galaxy sees us as primitives, barbarians who solve problems with violence because we lack the sophistication for anything else. And you came here to prove them wrong? No, Marcus said. I came here to prove them right. Kira's eyebrows rose in surprise. Explain. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. Humans are violent, Kira. We've been fighting each other for our entire recorded history. Wars over territory, resources, ideology, religion, skin color, things that seem trivial to more advanced species. We've nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. Then, why celebrate that nature? Because violence isn't always wrong, Marcus said simply. Sometimes, when someone is hurting people who can't defend themselves, violence is the only language they understand. Sometimes, fighting is the most moral thing you can do. He gestured around them at the perfect, peaceful garden. This whole system, this galactic civilization you're part of, it's built on a kind of violence. Economic violence, social violence, the violence of indifference. Your people were destroyed not by raiders, but by a system that only values things that can be turned into profit or power. Kira was quiet, processing his words. So you came here to fight that system? I came here to show them that humans don't think the way they do, that we don't accept their rules about who matters and who doesn't, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose to care about someone everyone else has written off. A new voice interrupted them. How touching. The barbarian and the broken bird, finding solace in their shared inadequacy. They turned to see Princess Yalara approaching through the garden paths. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed with patterns of superiority and disdain. Behind her walked 2 other rejected princesses, the Etherian princess whose wings now moved in agitated spirals, and one of the silicon twins whose crystal body rang with harmonic discord. Ladies, Marcus said politely, standing. Is there something I can help you with? You can explain yourself, Yalara said, stopping just outside comfortable conversational distance. Your choice has created chaos throughout the diplomatic corps. Trade agreements are being reconsidered. Military alliances are in question. The Centauran Empire is threatening to cut off resource shipments to human space unless you reconsider. Threats already? Marcus asked mildly. It's barely been a day. The Etherian princess descended until she hovered at eye level. This is not a joke, human. Your species occupies one minor star system with limited resources and no significant military power. You need our technology, our trade networks, our protection. By rejecting us, you've endangered your entire civilization. Kira started to stand, perhaps to remove herself from the confrontation, but Marcus gently touched her shoulder. She settled back onto the bench, though her scarred features showed distress. "Let me make sure I understand," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm. "You're saying that because I chose to marry someone you consider unworthy, your peoples will punish my entire species." "We're saying that actions have consequences," the silicon twin chimed, her crystal body pulsing with harsh light. "Your people are young and foolish, but we assumed you had enough intelligence to recognize beneficial relationships when offered them." Marcus looked from one princess to another, then back to Kira. "You know what this reminds me of? There's an old human story about a beauty contest. The judge had to choose between three goddesses, and each one tried to bribe him with promises of power, wealth, or love. When he chose love over the other options, it started a war that lasted 10 years and destroyed civilizations. Your mythology is irrelevant," Yalara said dismissively. "Is it?" Marcus stood and walked closer to the three princesses, his posture subtly shifting to something more dangerous. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're trying to bribe me with threats instead of promises. Marry one of us or we'll hurt your people. That's not diplomacy, ladies. That's extortion." The Etherean princess's wings fluttered rapidly. "You don't understand the complexity of galactic politics, human. Individual choices affect entire civilizations. Your personal preferences cannot be allowed to destabilize interstellar relations." "My personal preferences," Marcus repeated slowly. "Is that what you think this is about?" He turned to look back at Kira, who had been listening to this exchange with growing distress. Her good eyes showed confusion and the beginning of something that might have been guilt. "Kira," Marcus said gently, "do you think I should choose one of them instead? To protect my people from consequences?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Kira's scarred features worked through emotions she'd never been allowed to express. Finally, she spoke. "I think," she said carefully, "that these princesses have just proven your point about the nature of this civilization." She stood slowly, favoring her damaged side, and walked to stand beside Marcus. Though she barely reached his shoulder, there was something different in her posture, a straightening of her spine that hadn't been there before. "Princess Yalara," Kira said, addressing her former rival directly. "You speak of chaos and instability, but where was your concern for stability when my world burned? Where were these careful diplomatic considerations when an entire civilization was destroyed for profit?" Yalara's bioluminescence flickered with surprise. The broken princess had never spoken back before. Kira continued, her voice growing stronger. "You offer Marcus wealth and power and protection, but you threaten to withhold these same things if he doesn't comply with your wishes. How is that different from what the raiders did to my people? How is threatening to hurt innocents to get your way any different from what destroyed my world?" The Etherean princess descended aggressively. "You forget your place, damaged one. You speak to your betters." "Better," Kira laughed, and for the first time there was something like fire in her voice. "Better at what? Better at using power to hurt others? Better at turning suffering into leverage? Better at building systems that sacrifice the weak for the benefit of the strong?" She gestured to her own scars. "I may be broken, but I've never used my pain as a weapon against others. I've never threatened to hurt innocent people to get what I wanted. I've never looked at someone's suffering and seen opportunity." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest as he watched this transformation. The forgotten princess was finding her voice, and it was stronger than anyone had expected. "The human is obviously confused by your influence," the silicon twin said, her harmonic voice ringing with anger. "Damaged creatures often develop desperate attachments to anyone who shows them attention. That was a mistake." Marcus's expression went very still, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the edge that had terrified opponents in the arena. "Princess," he said quietly, "I suggest you be very careful about how you speak about my future wife." The temperature in the garden seemed to drop. The three princesses suddenly remembered that they were confronting someone who had systematically defeated the greatest warriors in the galaxy. someone who had earned his reputation with blood and violence. Is that a threat, human? Yalara asked, but her bioluminescence had dimmed noticeably. It's a statement of fact, Marcus replied. You came here to threaten my people if I didn't change my choice. You've insulted both me and Kira. You've tried to use fear and shame to manipulate a decision that's already been made. And now you're suggesting that my wife-to-be is somehow manipulating me. He took a step closer to them. So let me be very clear about something. My choice stands. If your civilizations want to punish humanity for that choice, we'll deal with the consequences. We've been dealing with hostile neighbors since before we left our homeworld. You'll be isolated, the Etherean princess warned. Cut off from galactic trade, from technology, from protection. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Princess, my species survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and nuclear weapons before we ever met another intelligent species. We built our civilization from nothing but stubbornness and a refusal to give up. If you want to try to isolate us, go ahead. But remember, I'm the one who just beat every champion your civilizations could produce. He paused, letting that sink in. And I'm about to marry someone who survived her world being destroyed and still found the strength to rebuild her life. Do you really think the two of us together are going to be intimidated by trade sanctions? The three princesses exchanged glances. This conversation had not gone the way they'd planned. This isn't over, Yalara said finally. Your choice will have consequences beyond what you can imagine. I'm sure it will, Marcus agreed. But here's something you should consider. Every consequence you create for choosing love over politics, every punishment you inflict for refusing to play by your rules, every act of retaliation you take against my people, all of that just proves that Kira and I are on the right side of this. The princesses left without another word, their footsteps echoing angrily through the garden paths. When they were gone, Marcus and Kira stood together in the sudden quiet, surrounded by the alien beauty of flowers that chimed in the breeze. They're right about one thing, Kira said quietly. This will have consequences. Your people might suffer because you chose me. Marcus turned to look at her. Kira, my people have been fighting impossible odds since we learned to stand upright. If we have to face some consequences for doing what's right, well, that's what we do. That's what makes us human. But what if no? Marcus said gently but firmly. No what-ifs. No second-guessing. No apologizing for being chosen. You are worth choosing, Princess Kira of Zephyros. You're worth choosing, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Kira's scarred face showed an emotion she'd never been allowed to feel before. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone begging for scraps, but the steady hope of someone who had finally found an ally worth standing with. Together, she repeated, as if testing the word. I like the sound of that. Good, Marcus said, offering her his arm. Because we've got a wedding to plan, and something tells me it's going to be the most interesting ceremony this galaxy has ever seen. As they walked back through the garden together, neither of them noticed the small surveillance devices hidden among the crystalline flowers, or the figures watching them from the shadowed alcoves. The consequences Yalara had promised were already beginning to unfold, and the galaxy was about to discover just how dangerous it could be to threaten someone a human cared about. The second part of their story was ending, but the real adventure was just beginning. The wedding ceremony was scheduled to take place in the Grand Amphitheater, a massive structure that could accommodate representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. What should have been a celebration had instead become a political battlefield, with each arriving delegation bringing their own agenda and barely concealed hostility. Marcus stood in his assigned preparation chamber, watching through the observation window as ships continued to dock at the station. Each vessel represented a different faction's response to his choice. Some came to witness what they saw as a spectacular diplomatic failure. Others came to ensure their disapproval was properly recorded. A few, he suspected, came hoping to prevent the ceremony entirely. Nervous? Asked Dr. Sarah Chun, his sister and the only family member who had been able to make the journey from Earth in time for the ceremony. She was examining the formal attire that had been provided, a fusion of human and galactic fashion that somehow managed to look both elegant and practical. Concerned, Marcus admitted, 3 assassination attempts in 2 days suggests not everyone is happy with my choice. Good thing they were all so incompetent, Sarah said dryly. Though, I have to admit, I'm curious about this princess of yours. The reports I've read make her sound like a tragic figure from ancient literature. Marcus smiled as he adjusted the ceremonial sash across his chest. She's not tragic anymore. Wait until you meet her. You'll understand why I chose her. A soft chime announced an arrival at the door. Marcus opened it to find Ambassador Vixens, the golden-scaled announcer who had presided over the selection ceremony. His expression was unreadable, but his scales showed the deep orange patterns that indicated serious concern. Champion Shun, he said formally. I bring news from the Galactic Council. There have been developments. What kind of developments? Sarah asked suspiciously. Vixens entered the chamber and activated a privacy shield with one of his forehands. 3 major trade federations have announced sanctions against human space. The Centauran Empire has formally withdrawn their protection agreements. The Silicon Lords have cut off access to their navigation networks. Marcus continued dressing as if he hadn't heard anything particularly alarming. Anything else? The Zephyrian royal family has officially disowned Princess Kira. They've declared her marriage to you as invalid and announced that any children from this union will have no claim to royal blood or property. Vixens paused. They've also placed a bounty on both your lives. That got Marcus's attention. A bounty? Her own family. Her uncle, Prince Vextar, announced it this morning. 50 million galactic credits for your deaths, to be paid by the Zephyrian treasury. He claims you've corrupted their bloodline and brought shame to their royal house. Sarah looked horrified. They're willing to murder their own niece to avoid embarrassment. The Zephyrian royal family has always valued appearance over substance, Vixens said sadly. Princess Kira's very existence has been an embarrassment to them since the destruction of their homeworld. This marriage gives them an excuse to finally eliminate what they see as a stain on their honor. Marcus finished putting on his formal jacket and turned to face the ambassador directly. How is Kira handling this news? With more strength than anyone expected. She's currently in her preparation chamber, helping her attendants plan security arrangements for the ceremony. She seems more concerned about protecting the guests than about the threats against herself. Of course she is, Marcus said with something that might have been pride. Is there anything else I should know before we begin? Vixens' scales shifted through several colors before settling on a pattern Marcus didn't recognize. There's one more thing. Several military vessels have taken positions around the station. They claim to be providing security, but their weapon systems are active and targeting the amphitheater. Sarah looked between her brother and the ambassador. Are they planning to attack during the ceremony? Unknown, Vixens admitted. But the ships belong to the families of the princesses you rejected. They may be hoping to prevent the marriage from being completed. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Finally, he smiled, the same expression that had unnerved opponents in the arena. Vixens, how legally binding is this ceremony once it begins? According to galactic law, once the vows are spoken and witnessed, the marriage is valid across all member civilizations. Nothing can undo it except death or mutual consent. And how long does the ceremony take? Approximately 15 minutes from start to finish. Marcus nodded. Then we'd better make sure those are the most interesting 15 minutes in galactic history. An hour later, the grand amphitheater was filled to capacity with beings from across the galaxy. The architecture itself was a marvel. Crystalline walls that could adjust their transparency and color, seating arranged in ascending circles that accommodated the wildly different anatomies of various species, and a central platform that could be reconfigured for any type of ceremony. Today, that platform had been set up in the traditional Zephyrian style, honoring Kira's heritage despite her family's disowning. Floating crystals provided gentle illumination while projecting symbols representing unity and new beginnings. The irony of the peaceful setting wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus stood at the center of the platform, wearing his formal attire, but with one significant addition, his combat armor's gauntlets. If violence erupted during the ceremony, he wanted to be prepared. The symbolic gesture wasn't lost on the audience either. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Vixens announced, his voice carrying throughout the amphitheater through translation circuits. We gather today to witness the union of Marcus Chun of Earth and Princess Kira of Zephyros, as sanctioned by ancient law and the right of champions. A murmur ran through the crowd as Princess Kira appeared at the entrance to the platform. She moved slowly, but with dignity, wearing traditional Zephyrian wedding robes that had been modified to accommodate her injuries. The fabric was a deep blue that complemented her skin tone, and the cut emphasized her natural grace while hiding the worst of her scars. More importantly, she walked alone. No family members escorted her. No royal guards flanked her path. She had chosen to enter this ceremony as herself, not as a representative of a bloodline that had abandoned her. As she approached the center of the platform, Marcus could see that her face showed no fear, only a calm determination that matched his own. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The bride and groom will now exchange personal vows, Vixens announced. As is traditional in these ceremonies, they will speak from the heart about their commitment to each other. Marcus took Kira's hands in his own, noting that she didn't flinch from his battle-scarred fingers. "Princess Kira," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. 3 days ago, I chose you not because of what you could give me, but because of who you are. Today I choose you again, knowing full well the consequences that choice will bring. He paused, looking directly in her good eye. I promise to stand with you against whatever challenges we face. I promise to see your strength where others see weakness, your beauty where others see only scars, your worth where others see only failure. And I promise that no matter what threats are made against us, no matter what forces try to tear us apart, I will never regret choosing love over politics." Kira's voice was steady as she responded. "Marcus Chun," she said, 3 days ago you saw me when no one else would. You chose me when no one thought I was worth choosing. Today I choose you in return, knowing that this choice makes me a target and an outcast." Her grip on his hands tightened slightly. "I promise to stand beside you against the forces that would punish us for refusing to play by their rules. I promise to help you build something better than what came before. And I promise that whatever consequences come from this union, I will face them with you rather than face them alone. Do you, Marcus Chun of Earth, take Princess Kira of Zephyros as your wife, to honor and protect according to the laws of your people and hers?" "I do," Marcus said firmly. "Do you, Princess Kira of Zephyros, take Marcus Chun of Earth as your husband, to honor and support according to the laws of your people and his?" "I do," Kira replied, her voice growing stronger. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the Galactic Council and the ancient laws of marriage, I declare you husband and wife. May your union bring strength to both your peoples and wisdom to—" Vixens' words were cut off by the sudden scream of alert klaxons. The amphitheater's walls flashed red as emergency systems activated. Through the transparent sections, weapons fire could be seen lighting up space around the station. "The ceremony is complete," Vixens shouted over the noise. "The marriage is legally binding. All guests please evacuate in an orderly fashion." But Marcus and Kira didn't move. They stood together on the platform, still holding hands, watching as chaos erupted around them. Most of the guests were fleeing toward the exits, but some were moving with too much purpose, too much coordination. Armed hostiles in sections 7 and 12, Sarah's voice crackled through Marcus's emergency communicator. She had positioned herself in the amphitheater's control room during the ceremony. "I count at least 30 individuals moving against the crowd flow." Marcus squeezed Kira's hand once before releasing it. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "This was planned." "I know," Kira replied, surprising him. "I've been watching their movement patterns since the ceremony began. They were positioned to strike as soon as we were declared married." Before Marcus could ask how she'd noticed what he'd missed, the first assassin struck. A figure in concealing robes leaped onto the platform, wielding an energy blade that hummed with lethal power. Marcus moved to intercept, but Kira was faster. Despite her damaged wings and scarred body, she proved that growing up as the unwanted child of a royal family had taught her more than just how to endure abuse. Her foot swept the assassin's legs out from under him, while her elbow drove into his solar plexus. The attacker hit the platform hard and didn't get back up. Marcus stared at his new wife in amazement. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Same place I learned to survive," Kira said, pulling a weapon from beneath her wedding robes. "The royal court isn't as civilized as they pretend to be. I've been defending myself for years." More attackers were climbing onto the platform now, emerging from the panicking crowd like predators sensing wounded prey. But they had underestimated both their targets. Marcus moved with the fluid violence that had made him champion, his armored gauntlets turning aside energy blades while his fists disabled opponents with surgical precision. Kira fought differently, using her smaller size and presumed weakness to lure attackers into overextending before striking with devastating effectiveness. Her damaged wing appendages, which everyone assumed were useless, proved to be surprisingly effective defensive tools when properly employed. "Behind you," Kira shouted, spinning to intercept an assassin who had been trying to flank Marcus. Her blade, a traditional Zephyrian honor dagger she'd concealed in her robes, found the gap in his armor with practiced ease. They worked together with an instinctive coordination that surprised both of them. Marcus's straightforward aggression complemented Kira's deceptive subtlety perfectly. Within minutes, the platform was clear of immediate threats, though the sounds of fighting continued throughout the amphitheater. "The exits are blocked," Sarah reported through the communicator. "Multiple ships outside are firing on the station. Looks like someone really wants to make sure this marriage doesn't survive the honeymoon." Marcus looked around at the chaos surrounding them. Panicking civilians, armed mercenaries, explosions lighting up space beyond the walls. "Any ideas, wife?" Kira smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it was a predator's expression. "Actually, yes. How do you feel about starting our marriage with a little revolution?" Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Kira activated something on her wedding robes. The fabric shifted, revealing hidden panels and integrated technology that transformed her formal wear into something that looked suspiciously like tactical gear. "Kira," Marcus said slowly, "exactly what haven't you told me about yourself?" "Oh, many things," she replied, checking the power levels on several devices that definitely weren't traditional wedding accessories. "For instance, did you know that being the forgotten child of a royal family is excellent cover for building a resistance network?" She gestured around them at the chaos. "Did you think it was coincidence that someone as politically worthless as me ended up in that selection ceremony?" "Marcus, dear husband, you didn't just choose the least celebrated alien princess." Her good eye gleamed with something that might have been mischief. "You chose the leader of the largest underground movement in this sector of the galaxy. And now that we're married, their resources are our resources." Marcus looked at his new wife, really looked at her, and began to understand that he had chosen even better than he'd thought. "How large is this resistance network?" "Large enough to turn an assassination attempt into the opening battle of a war," Kira said, activating her communicator. "All cells, this is Princess 6. Wedding gifts are now authorized." "Repeat, wedding gifts are authorized." Throughout the station, hidden devices activated. Emergency bulkheads sealed sections containing known assassins. Navigation systems failed on the attacking ships. Most importantly, broadcast arrays throughout the sector began transmitting a signal that had been prepared for exactly this moment. "Citizens of the galaxy," Kira's voice echoed from speakers across hundreds of worlds, "today you have witnessed something unprecedented. Today, representatives of your government have attempted to murder 2 people for refusing to play by rules that benefit only the powerful at the expense of everyone else." The transmission showed footage of the attack on the wedding ceremony, of royal guards firing on civilians, of aristocrats literally trying to kill love because it threatened their political arrangements. "This is what your civilization has become," Kira continued. "A system where choosing compassion over profit is punishable by death, where standing with the forgotten is treated as treason, where love itself is seen as a threat to stability." Marcus took her hand again as they stood together on the platform, surrounded by the evidence of their enemy's violence. "But today marks the beginning of something new," Kira said. "Today we stop accepting that this is how things have to be. Today we start building something better." The transmission ended, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy for years to come. The marriage of Marcus Chun and Princess Kira had become something much larger than a personal choice. It had become the symbol of a revolution. "So," Marcus said as the sounds of fighting began to die down around them, "ready for the honeymoon?" Kira laughed, and the sound carried joy for the first time in years. "Darling," she said, "I think our honeymoon is going to involve liberating half the galaxy." "Perfect," Marcus replied. I was hoping for something interesting. As they walked off the platform together, stepping over unconscious assassins and around damaged ceremonial decorations, neither of them looked back. The third part of their story was ending, but the real adventure was just beginning. Behind them, the grand amphitheater slowly emptied as the last of the threats were neutralized. But across the galaxy, in hidden meeting places and secret communications networks, the message had been received. The revolution had begun, and it had started with a wedding that nobody would ever forget. 2 years later, Marcus and Kira stood in the observation deck of New Zephyros Station, watching the first ships of the Galactic Reconstruction Fleet return from their missions across the outer territories. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built using technology and resources freely shared between species that had once viewed each other as competitors or resources to be exploited. The view through the massive transparent aluminum windows showed a sight that would have been impossible before their revolution. Ships from hundreds of different worlds working together, their hulls bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Cooperative, a symbol that represented mutual aid rather than imperial domination. The final report from the Kepler trials came in this morning, Kira said, holding a tablet that contained information that would have been classified under the old system. All delegates found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide. Most have been sentenced to mandatory service in reconstruction efforts on the worlds they helped destroy. Marcus nodded, though his attention was focused on something else entirely, the slight curve of Kira's belly beneath her simple work clothes. After 2 years of marriage and revolution, they were finally expecting their first child. "Any word from Earth?" he asked. "Your government has officially joined the cooperative as a full member. President Harrison sends his congratulations on our upcoming parenthood and his assurance that Earth stands ready to provide whatever support the reconstruction efforts require." It was a far cry from the early days of the revolution, when Earth's leadership had been terrified that their association with Marcus would bring imperial wrath down on their homeworld. The disclosure of the final rationalization plans had changed everything, showing human leaders exactly what the old galactic order had planned for their species. And the resistance cells we haven't been able to contact. Kira's expression grew more serious. 17 groups are still operating independently in imperial holdout territories. The former hegemony of industrial worlds is proving particularly difficult to reach. Their new government has banned all outside communication and declared the cooperative a terrorist organization. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the bustling activity around the station. Construction crews were working on expanding the habitat rings to accommodate the growing population of refugees who had fled the remnants of the old order. Medical ships were docked at the emergency bays, treating survivors of the brutal crackdowns that had followed the revolution. Dr. Sarah Chun to Observation Deck 7. Came an announcement over the station's communication system. Priority message for the Admiral and Princess. A few minutes later, Sarah arrived carrying a sealed communication device that bore the highest encryption markings. Her expression was grim as she activated the privacy shields. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "Our contacts in the Outer Rim have detected massive fleet movements. The Imperial holdouts are massing their remaining forces for what intelligence suggests is a final offensive against cooperative territory." She activated a holographic display showing ship positions across a significant portion of the galaxy. Red markers indicated hostile forces, while blue showed cooperative assets. The distribution was sobering. While the cooperative controlled more territory and had the support of most civilian populations, the Imperial forces still possessed significant military advantages. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "Bad enough. They're calling it Operation Restoration. The plan is to retake Kepler Station and execute every being who participated in the trials. They figure if they can recreate the old power structure and eliminate the leadership of a new one, they can restore the Imperial system." Kira was studying the tactical display with the analytical mind that had made her such an effective resistance leader. "What's their timeline?" 6 weeks, until they reach cooperative space. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. They had spent 2 years building something new, creating systems based on cooperation rather than exploitation. But the galaxy was vast, and not everyone was ready to abandon the old ways. Options he asked. We could evacuate the core systems and establish a defensive perimeter around the inner worlds, Sarah suggested. Let them reclaim the outer territories and hope they're satisfied with partial restoration. Absolutely not, Kira said firmly. We don't abandon people who trusted us with their freedom. If we retreat now, every being in the territories we leave behind will be executed as an example to others. Marcus nodded. Agreed. What else? We could attempt a preemptive strike, Sarah continued reluctantly. Hit their staging areas before they're fully organized. It would be risky, but it might disrupt their offensive enough to buy us time to prepare better defenses. How many casualties on both sides? Marcus asked. Sarah's expression grew even more grim. Million, maybe tens of millions. These aren't the careful, targeted operations we've been running. This would be total war. Marcus looked out at the station's civilian population going about their daily lives, building families and communities in the freedom they had helped create. Children of a dozen different species played together in the common areas, growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal rather than revolutionary. There has to be another way, he said finally. Kira moved to stand beside him, her hand resting on her growing belly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that we didn't get this far by fighting the way our enemies expected us to fight. Every time they've underestimated us, it's been because they assumed we would use the same methods they would use. He turned to face Sarah. What would happen if we did nothing? If we let them come to us and simply welcome them? Marcus, Sarah said carefully, these aren't rational actors looking for negotiation. These are the hardcore supporters of a system that viewed most intelligent life as resources to be managed. They're coming here to restore genocide as official policy. I understand that. But what if they arrived expecting a fight and found something else entirely? Kira's scarred features showed the beginnings of understanding. You want to show them what they'd be destroying. Exactly. These Imperial holdouts, they've been isolated in their territories for 2 years. They've been fed propaganda about what the cooperative represents, about what we've built here. They think they're coming to fight terrorists and criminals who have disrupted galactic stability. Marcus gestured toward the window, toward the peaceful activity of the station. What if they arrived to find ordinary beings living ordinary lives? Families raising children, researchers developing new technologies, artists creating beauty, merchants trading freely between worlds. They're not going to be swayed by sentiment. Marcus, Sarah warned. These are beings who were prepared to eliminate billions of people for disagreeing with them. Maybe not the leaders, Marcus agreed. But what about the soldiers? What about the crews of those ships? They're not all psychopaths, Sarah. Most of them probably joined up because they were told they were defending civilization against chaos. Kira was studying the tactical display again, but her expression had changed. It could work, she said slowly. Not with all of them, but with enough. If we could convince even 20% of their forces to defect, their offensive would collapse, Sarah finished, beginning to see the possibilities. But it would require us to be completely defenseless when they arrive. If we're wrong about this, if we're wrong, we all die, Marcus said simply. But if we're right, we end this war without turning into the thing we've been fighting against. 6 months after their wedding, Marcus and Kira stood on the bridge of the Defiance, a heavily modified Terran cruiser that had become the mobile headquarters of what galactic media had dubbed the Forgotten Alliance. The ship bore scars from a dozen battles, its hull patched with armor plates from different worlds, a visual representation of the coalition they had built. The main view screen showed their destination, Kepler Station, a massive orbital facility that served as the primary trading hub for the Outer Rim territories. According to intelligence reports, the station was scheduled to host a secret meeting between representatives of the major powers, all gathered to discuss the human problem and their rebellious princess. Sensor readings confirmed 12 dreadnoughts in defensive positions around the station, reported Lieutenant Shun. No relation to Marcus, but one of the growing number of humans who had joined their cause after Earth officially declared neutrality in the conflict. They're not taking any chances this time. Marcus studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had spent years analyzing opponents' weaknesses. What about the station's civilian population? Approximately 2 million beings from 47 different species, Kira answered from her position at the intelligence console. Most are traders, merchants, and their families. the conference delegates, and their security forces number less than 1,000. She paused, her scarred fingers dancing across holographic controls. However, our contacts inside report that the station's life support systems have been modified. If the meeting goes badly, they're prepared to vent the civilian sectors to space. The bridge fell silent. Even after 6 months of fighting against the galactic establishment, the casual willingness to murder millions of innocents to protect a political meeting was shocking. They're using them as human shields, Sarachin said from her position at the communication array. She had become the Alliance's chief information warfare specialist, her background in xenopsychology proving invaluable in understanding how different species process propaganda. Marcus turned to address the mixed crew of humans, Zephyrians, and refugees from a dozen other worlds that now served aboard the Defiance. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, he said, unconsciously echoing the formal address Thexaler had used at their wedding. I want to make something clear before we proceed. He gestured toward the view screen showing Kepler Station. What we do here today will be remembered for generations. Not just because we're going to stop a meeting of tyrants, but because we're going to prove that the powerful cannot hide behind the innocent forever. Kira stood beside him, her presence providing the credibility that Marcus's human status sometimes lacked among alien crew members. The delegates meeting on that station represent everything we've been fighting against, she continued. They've gathered to discuss how to eliminate not just us, but every movement for freedom and dignity that has sprouted across the galaxy in the past 6 months. She activated a holographic display showing intelligence reports from across known space. Refugee camps have been established on 18 worlds for beings displaced by economic warfare. Labor strikes have erupted on 43 industrial planets. 7 minor governments have declared independence from their imperial overlords. And all of this started because one human refused to choose power over principle. Which brings us to today's mission, Marcus said. We're not going to attack that station. We're not going to fire a single shot at those dreadnoughts. We're going to do something much worse. We're going to show the galaxy what those delegates are really planning. He nodded to Sarah, who activated the ship's most sophisticated piece of equipment, a quantum communications array that had been salvaged from a derelict precursor vessel and modified with technology from a dozen different species. The entire meeting is being broadcast on encrypted channels to government leaders across the galaxy, Sarah reported. Our job is to break that encryption and relay the signal to every public communication network we can reach. How do we get close enough to intercept without being blown apart by those dreadnoughts? Asked Commander Thexaler, who had resigned his position with the Galactic Council 3 months earlier to join their cause. His golden scales had faded to a more subdued bronze since making that choice. But his voice carried the same authority it always had. Kira smiled, an expression that had become far more common since their marriage, though it still carried an edge of predatory satisfaction. We don't need to get close. We have someone on the inside. The main screen shifted to show a communication from deep within Kepler Station. The face that appeared was instantly recognizable to everyone on the bridge. Princess Yalara of the Centauran Empire, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with patterns of nervous excitement. Princess Yalara, Marcus said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. You're working with us now? Circumstances change, Marcus Chun, Yalara replied, her usual arrogance replaced by something that might have been humility. When my father decided that the best solution to the rebellion problem was to sterilize every world that had shown sympathy to your cause, I discovered that even I have limits. Kira leaned forward. Explain. The plan being discussed today involves the systematic elimination of what they call defective populations, Yalara said, her bioluminescence dimming to almost nothing. Any species, government, or group that has shown support for your alliance is to be marked for genetic correction or outright extermination. They're calling it the final rationalization. The bridge crew exchanged horrified glances. Genocide on such a scale was almost incomprehensible, even for beings who had grown up in a galaxy where individual rights were routinely trampled. How many worlds are on the target list? Marcus asked. Hundreds, Yalara replied, including Earth. They've decided that humanity as a species represents a fundamental threat to galactic stability. The plan is to reduce your population to a manageable number and place survivors in controlled breeding programs to eliminate what they call aggressive genetic markers. Sarah's face had gone pale. They want to breed the fighting spirit out of the human race. Among other things, Yalara confirmed. They believe that your species' tendency to choose principle over profit is a dangerous mutation that could spread to other populations if not controlled. Marcus felt something cold and deadly settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about him and Kira anymore. This wasn't even just about political freedom. This was about the right of entire species to exist without permission from their self-appointed superiors. Yalara, he said quietly, what do you need from us? I want to broadcast the proceedings on all available channels, but I need you to amplify the signal and ensure it reaches every populated system in known space. The galaxy needs to hear what their leaders are planning. And then, Yalara's bioluminescence flared briefly in what Marcus had learned was the Centauran equivalent of a grim smile. Then, we hope that beings across the galaxy have enough sense of self-preservation to realize they might be next on the list. We'll be in position in 10 minutes, Kira reported. All departments, prepare for Operation Spotlight. As the Defiance moved into position, carefully staying outside the patrol routes of the defending dreadnoughts, Marcus found himself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, he had made what everyone considered a foolish choice based on nothing more than empathy and principle. Now that choice had grown into a movement that threatened the very foundations of galactic civilization. Marcus, Kira said softly, joining him at the tactical display. Are you ready for this? Once we broadcast what they're planning, there's no going back. Every government in the galaxy will mark us for elimination. Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her. The scars were still there. The damaged wing appendages still hung useless at her sides. But the broken princess who had sat in the shadows 6 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered her own strength and chosen to use it to protect others. Kira, he said, 6 months ago you asked me why I chose you. Do you remember what I said? That you chose me because I was the only one who didn't expect to be chosen, she replied. That's part of it. But the real reason was that when I looked at you, I saw someone who understood what it meant to suffer and chose not to inflict that suffering on others. I saw someone who could have become bitter and cruel because of what happened to her, but instead became stronger and kinder. He gestured toward the view screen showing Kepler Station. These people in this meeting, they've had every advantage life could offer. They've had power, wealth, privilege, and they've used all of it to create systems that maximize suffering for their own benefit. They represent everything that's wrong with the current order. And what do we represent? Marcus smiled. We represent the future. A future where choices are made based on what's right instead of what's profitable. Where strength is used to protect the weak instead of exploiting them. Where love is valued more than leverage. Signal established, Sarah reported. Princess Yalara is beginning the broadcast. The bridge fell silent as images and audio from inside Kepler Station filled their screens. The meeting was taking place in an elegant chamber that could have housed a small city. Representatives from the major powers sat in a vast circle, their voices carrying clearly through the quantum communication link. Consensus that the human contagion must be contained before it spreads further. A Silicon Lord was saying, its crystalline body pulsing with harsh harmonics. Their tendency to value individual welfare over collective efficiency threatens the stability of our economic models. Agreed, came the voice of an Etherean senator, her wings creating hypnotic patterns in the air. However, simple elimination is insufficient. We must address the psychological factors that make other species susceptible to their influence. Marcus watched in growing horror as the assembled representatives calmly discussed the systematic elimination of billions of beings whose only crime was believing that life should involve more than serving the interests of their betters. The Terran question is simple enough, said a representative wearing the ceremonial robes of the Merchant Coalition. We reduced their population to approximately 50 million individuals, selected for genetic compliance and distributed across controlled colonies where their reproductive choices can be properly managed. What about the other affected species? Asked someone whose universal translator identified as speaking for the hegemony of industrial worlds. Case-by-case evaluation. Some populations can be re-educated. Others will require more permanent solutions. The euphemisms were chilling in their casual cruelty. These beings were discussing genocide with the same tone others might use to plan a business merger. Signal is being transmitted across the galaxy, Sarah reported, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. We're reaching approximately 90% of inhabited systems. On the screen, Princess Yalara stood and addressed the assembly. Honored delegates, she said, her bioluminescence pulsing in formal patterns. Before we proceed with these final recommendations, shouldn't we consider the possibility of peaceful resolution? Perhaps negotiations with the Alliance leadership could— The time for negotiation is past, interrupted the Zephyrian representative, Prince Vextar, Kira's own uncle. My niece and her human pet have already proven that they cannot be reasoned with. They rejected every opportunity for compromise. Kira's good eye blazed with fury as she watched her uncle speak. Compromise, she said bitterly. He means they rejected every demand for surrender. The Alliance has made its position clear, Vextar continued. They believe that individual choice should supersede collective stability, that personal relationships should override political necessity, that the weak should be protected rather than eliminated. Such thinking is fundamentally incompatible with civilized governance. Then, we are in agreement, said the Centauran Emperor, Yalara's own father. The final rationalization will proceed as planned. Phase 1 begins with the elimination of Alliance leadership, followed by targeted population reduction across affected systems. Marcus felt something shift inside him as he listened to these representatives casually plan the destruction of everything he and Kira had built. They weren't just planning to kill the Alliance. They were planning to eliminate the very idea that beings could choose compassion over compliance. All ships, prepare for immediate departure, he ordered, his voice carrying the edge that had once terrified arena opponents. We've heard enough. Marcus, Kira said, what are you planning? I'm planning to show these delegates that they've made a fundamental miscalculation, Marcus replied, moving to the ship's communication array. They think this is about politics and power and resource management. They don't understand that they've just declared war on hope itself. He opened a channel that would transmit directly to Kepler Station. Overriding their security protocols with technology Kira's resistance network had been developing for years. Honored delegates. Marcus's voice echoed through the meeting chamber, his words carrying to billions of beings across the galaxy. This is Marcus Chun, speaking for the Forgotten Alliance. We've been listening to your discussion with great interest. The reaction on Kepler Station was immediate. Security forces scrambled to locate the source of the transmission, while the delegates demanded answers from their technical staff. You've just outlined your plans for genocide on a galactic scale, Marcus continued. You've revealed that your idea of solving the problem of beings who believe in dignity and freedom is to simply eliminate them from existence. He paused, letting that sink in across hundreds of worlds where ordinary beings were listening in growing horror. You've made one critical error in your calculations, Marcus said. You've assumed that we're the exception. You think that the vast majority of intelligent beings in this galaxy actually support your systems of exploitation and oppression. Another pause. You're about to discover just how wrong you are. The transmission ended, but its effects were immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, on world after world, beings who had been living under the crushing weight of the current system heard their leaders casually discussing their elimination and realized they had nothing left to lose. Hyperspace signatures detected, reported the tactical officer. Multiple ships are jumping into the system. The main screen showed vessels appearing around Kepler Station, not attacking, but simply arriving. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of ships of every size and configuration. Merchant vessels, passenger liners, industrial transports, even small personal craft. All of them broadcasting the same message. We stand with the Forgotten Alliance. Within an hour, the space around Kepler Station was filled with the largest civilian fleet in galactic history. Millions of beings who had heard their leaders' plans and decided they would rather fight than be eliminated for the crime of having consciences. It's beautiful, Kira whispered, watching the display. Look at them. They're not waiting for someone to save them. They're saving themselves. Marcus took her hand, marveling at how their small act of choosing love over politics had grown into something that could reshape an entire civilization. Status report from Princess Yalara, Sarah announced. The delegates are requesting immediate evacuation. They're claiming the civilian fleet represents a terrorist threat to galactic stability. Response. Marcus asked. The civilian fleet is suggesting that the delegates are welcome to try explaining their position to the several million beings who just heard their elimination plans. Marcus smiled. For the first time since this all began, he felt like they might actually win. Signal the fleet, he ordered. Welcome them to the real revolution. And let them know that the fourth part of our story is ending, but the best part is just beginning. As the Defiance moved to join the vast fleet surrounding Kepler Station, Marcus and Kira stood together on the bridge, watching as their personal choice to value love over power became the foundation for a new kind of civilization. The fourth part of their story was ending, but the galaxy would never be the same again. 2 years later, Marcus and Kira stood in the observation deck of New Zephyros Station, watching the first ships of the Galactic Reconstruction Fleet return from their missions across the outer territories. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built using technology and resources freely shared between species that had once viewed each other as competitors or resources to be exploited. The view through the massive transparent aluminum windows showed a sight that would have been impossible before their revolution. Ships from hundreds of different worlds working together, their hulls bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Cooperative, a symbol that represented mutual aid rather than imperial domination. The final report from the Kepler trials came in this morning, Kira said, holding a tablet that contained information that would have been classified under the old system. All delegates found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide. Most have been sentenced to mandatory service in reconstruction efforts on the worlds they helped destroy. Marcus nodded, though his attention was focused on something else entirely, the slight curve of Kira's belly beneath her simple work clothes. After 2 years of marriage and revolution, they were finally expecting their first child. Any word from Earth? He asked. Your government has officially joined the cooperative as a full member. President Harrison sends his congratulations on our upcoming parenthood and his assurance that Earth stands ready to provide whatever support the reconstruction efforts require. It was a far cry from the early days of the revolution, when Earth's leadership had been terrified that their association with Marcus would bring imperial wrath down on their homeworld. The disclosure of the final rationalization plans had changed everything, showing human leaders exactly what the old galactic order had planned for their species. And the resistance cells we haven't been able to contact. Kira's expression grew more serious. 17 groups are still operating independently in imperial holdout territories. The former hegemony of industrial worlds is proving particularly difficult to reach. Their new government has banned all outside communication and declared the cooperative a terrorist organization. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the bustling activity around the station. Construction crews were working on expanding the habitat rings to accommodate the growing population of refugees who had fled the remnants of the old order. Medical ships were docked at the emergency bays, treating survivors of the brutal crackdowns that had followed the revolution. Dr. Sarah Chun to Observation Deck 7 came an announcement over the station's communication system. Priority message for the Admiral and Princess. A few minutes later, Sarah arrived carrying a sealed communication device that bore the highest encryption markings. Her expression was grim as she activated the privacy shields. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "Our contacts in the Outer Rim have detected massive fleet movements. The Imperial holdouts are massing their remaining forces for what intelligence suggests is a final offensive against cooperative territory." She activated a holographic display showing ship positions across a significant portion of the galaxy. Red markers indicated hostile forces, while blue showed cooperative assets. The distribution was sobering. While the cooperative controlled more territory and had the support of most civilian populations, the Imperial forces still possessed significant military advantages. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "Bad enough. They're calling it Operation Restoration. The plan is to retake Kepler Station and execute every being who participated in the trials. They figure if they can recreate the old power structure and eliminate the leadership of a new one, they can restore the Imperial system." Kira was studying the tactical display with the analytical mind that had made her such an effective resistance leader. What's their timeline? 6 weeks until they reach cooperative space. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. They had spent 2 years building something new, creating systems based on cooperation rather than exploitation. But the galaxy was vast, and not everyone was ready to abandon the old ways. Options, he asked. We could evacuate the core systems and establish a defensive perimeter around the inner worlds, Sarah suggested. Let them reclaim the outer territories and hope they're satisfied with partial restoration. Absolutely not, Kira said firmly. We don't abandon people who trusted us with their freedom. If we retreat now, every being in the territories we leave behind will be executed as an example to others. Marcus nodded. Agreed. What else? We could attempt a preemptive strike, Sarah continued reluctantly. Hit their staging areas before they're fully organized. It would be risky, but it might disrupt their offensive enough to buy us time to prepare better defenses. How many casualties on both sides? Marcus asked. Sarah's expression grew even more grim. Medial, maybe tens of millions. These aren't the careful, targeted operations we've been running. This would be total war. Marcus looked out at the station's civilian population going about their daily lives, building families and communities in the freedom they had helped create. Children of a dozen different species played together in the common areas, growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal rather than revolutionary. There has to be another way, he said finally. Kira moved to stand beside him, her hand resting on her growing belly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that we didn't get this far by fighting the way our enemies expected us to fight. Every time they've underestimated us, it's been because they assumed we would use the same methods they would use. He turned to face Sarah. What would happen if we did nothing? If we let them come to us and simply welcomed them? Marcus, Sarah said carefully, these aren't rational actors looking for negotiation. These are the hardcore supporters of a system that viewed most intelligent life as resources to be managed. They're coming here to restore genocide as official policy. I understand that. But what if they arrived expecting a fight and found something else entirely? Kira's scarred features showed the beginnings of understanding. You want to show them what they'd be destroying. Exactly. These Imperial holdouts, they've been isolated in their territories for 2 years. They've been fed propaganda about what the cooperative represents, about what we've built here. They think they're coming to fight terrorists and criminals who have disrupted galactic stability. Marcus gestured toward the window, toward the peaceful activity of the station. What if they arrived to find ordinary beings living ordinary lives? Families raising children, researchers developing new technologies, artists creating beauty, merchants trading freely between worlds. They're not going to be swayed by sentiment. Marcus, Sarah warned. These are beings who are prepared to eliminate billions of people for disagreeing with them. Maybe not the leaders, Marcus agreed. But what about the soldiers? What about the crews of those ships? They're not all psychopaths, Sarah. Most of them probably joined up because they were told they were defending civilization against chaos. Kira was studying the tactical display again, but her expression had changed. It could work, she said slowly. Not with all of them, but with enough. If we could convince even 20% of their forces to defect, their offensive would collapse, Sarah finished, beginning to see the possibilities. But it would require us to be completely defenseless when they arrive. If we're wrong about this, if we're wrong, we all die, Marcus said simply. But if we're right, we end this war without turning into the thing we've been fighting against. There was a long pause as the three of them considered the magnitude of what Marcus was suggesting. It would require every member of the cooperative to trust in the fundamental decency of beings who had been prepared to commit genocide. Finally, Kira spoke. I think, she said carefully, that this is exactly the kind of impossible choice that brought us together in the first place. She turned to address Sarah directly. Send word to all cooperative worlds. Full evacuation of military assets from the outer territories. All armed vessels are to withdraw to the core systems and stand down. Civilian populations are to remain in place and continue their normal activities. Kira, Sarah said, you're asking millions of beings to trust their lives to the conscience of people who want to kill them. Yes, Kira replied simply. I am. Because the alternative is to become the same kind of people we fought to overthrow. Over the following weeks, The most unusual military maneuver in galactic history unfolded. Cooperative defense fleets withdrew from the outer territories, leaving civilian populations completely undefended. Instead of preparing for war, these communities continued their daily routines. Children attended schools, researchers pursued their studies, merchants conducted trade between worlds. The only change was the installation of communication arrays that would broadcast everything that happened when the Imperial forces arrived. The galaxy would witness exactly what the Old Order meant when they spoke of restoration. Marcus and Kira remained on New Zephyros station, refusing suggestions that they evacuate to safer locations. If they were asking ordinary beings to trust in this strategy, they would face the same risks themselves. Contact on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Chun from the station's command center. Imperial fleet is entering the outer system. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Marcus activated the station-wide communication system. Citizens of New Zephyros Station, this is Admiral Chun. As you know, elements of the former Imperial system are approaching our station. They believe they're coming to fight a war against terrorists and criminals. He paused, looking out at the community they had helped build. Instead, they're going to find ordinary people living ordinary lives in extraordinary freedom. They're going to see what we've built together, and they're going to have to choose whether that's something worth destroying. All personnel are to remain at their stations and continue normal operations, Kira added, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system. Show them who we really are. Show them what we've accomplished. And trust that most intelligent beings, when faced with a clear choice between